So one of the reasons why we're doing the pilot training tonight is so we can get feedback on it for future trainings that we do on environmental justice screen. So feel free to provide any feedback to me on the training tonight, especially because we're piloting this training in general for Portland area community members, and also just piloting a hybrid training option as well. So would love your feedback so we can make it better the next time we deliver it. And with that said, I just want to preface this by the reason why we're doing this environmental justice screen training is because in the Portland Harbor Community Involvement Plan that EPA released in August of 2020, that I know a lot of you, hey, welcome, that a lot of you provided feedback on and interviews for or are familiar with. One part of that plan is an action plan, which EPA committed to take different actions for community involvement for the Portland Harbor Superfund site. And part of that action plan is an environmental justice section. And one of the pieces of that was to provide environmental justice screen training, because this is a very powerful tool. It's become more powerful, especially this year. There's been a lot of updates that Emily will talk about. And to provide training to communities affected by the Superfund site, but also tribal representatives, tribal members, and potentially responsible parties and performing parties for the site too, because it's a tool everyone can use. So that's all I'm going to say. I'm going to hand it over to Emily now to go through a brief introduction of herself and then get into the tool. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. And thank you for everybody who attended last night as well. I really appreciate your time. So my name is Emily Batalok. I'm an environmental justice coordinator for the EPA. Previously to the EPA, I got my degree in biosystems engineering from Clemson University. And then I joined the Peace Corps. So I was in the Philippines for about 2.5 years doing like coastal resource management and fishing surveys with community groups there. And then I joined the EPA and I did a little bit of enforcement work. And now I've switched over to the environmental justice side. So again, thank you for letting me be here today. I'm really excited to show you this tool. As Laura said, there's a lot of updates to the tool. And so it's really powerful. And I think it's great for community members to be able to look at an area that they live and kind of know what environmental impacts are kind of surrounding their area. I'm going to do a broad overview of EJScreen, and then we're kind of going to dive into the tool. I'm going to do a live demo, and I encourage everyone to open up the tool themselves and kind of play with it. And if you have questions, you can ask me. And then at the end, if you also just have general questions about environmental justice, I'm happy to answer those as well. So I'm going to share my screen. One second. Okay, hopefully that looks good to everybody. Okay. Okay, so my plan for tonight is to just do a broad introduction to what is EJScreen, go over some of the data that you can find in EJScreen, talk about the maps, reports, and tools that you can download and save for later, talk about who's using EJScreen and what they're using it for. And then, like I said, I'm going to do a live demonstration of the tool. So first of all, what is EJScreen? EJScreen is EPA's web-based GIS tool for nationally consistent EJ screening and mapping data. So that means that all of the data sets that we use, we have for the entirety of the US. So we don't have specific data that we're pulling in from the state of Oregon. We're pulling in national data that's consistent across the country. And with that, you can compare to the entire nation or to the state. So what EJScreen does is it combines environmental and socioeconomic data to highlight areas where vulnerable populations may exist. We typically at EPA use this as a starting point when we're working with communities to kind of see what we might find when we go there. So some key features of EJScreen. The data in here is the most up to date. So every single year, EJScreen will go through an update, and any data that has been updated that year will be incorporated into the tool. So it's very up to date information. It also uses US Census Bureau data. So that's updated as frequently as possible as well. Right now, we're using the American Community Survey from 2016 to 2020. It provides the highest resolution of data available. So it's looking at block groups. You're able to download the data for future use. So you can save your sessions, you can save your reports, you can email them to people, you can share them. This is all like publicly available, which is really exciting. And some of the updates have made it more user-friendly. So I'm hoping that you'll find that tonight when you give it a try yourselves. So in EJScreen, some of the data that we have 12 different EJ indices. And what is an EJ index? It's looking at environmental data, a specific environmental data set like ozone, and it's comparing it to that demographic information for that area. So it's looking at low income and people of color, and then comparing it to a specific environmental indicator to give you this EJ index. So we have 12 different environmental indicators that we're looking at. So for each of those 12, we also have an EJ index associated with that. Some updates to the tool include supplemental indices. So these are including additional demographic information. It's actually including all 7 of the socioeconomic indicators that the tool has. So there's multiple different ways to kind of pull data from this tool and to like view it from different viewpoints. We also recently incorporated data from other agencies like NOAA and CDC. So now we have health indicators, climate change indicators, and critical service gaps. So as I mentioned, the tool was just updated in October. And with these updates, now we have territory data for some of the US territories, which is exciting because previously we didn't have that. As I mentioned, those supplemental indices, so that's comparing the environmental indicator with 7 different demographic indicators. We have threshold maps for more advanced GIS users. I don't think I'll get into them tonight with our short hour, but if you have questions on those, you can email me at a later time. And then, yeah, we have the updated demographic and environmental data. And then we also changed the way that we calculate things in EJScreen. Previously, we used to look at population, but that kind of skewed the results in rural areas where there weren't that many people. So now we kind of removed that population aspect to get more accurate calculations for the entire country. I really like to caveat and talk about the limitations of EJScreen because it's a screening tool. It is not the final answer. We at EPA do not label EJ communities. We will always say communities with EJ concerns because we feel that a community should be able to identify as who they want to identify as, not for us to tell them that. So again, when we use EJScreen, we're looking at communities that may have EJ concerns, but we're not labeling anybody as that. Obviously, this also only looks at 12 environmental indicators, so there are a broad range of things that contribute to environmental justice. So again, this is just kind of a screening tool, and we encourage people to use on-the-ground information as well. So I talked a little bit about the data, so we can kind of look a little bit more on where EJScreen is pulling from. So when we look at the data in EJScreen, there's different subsets we can look at. So a block is kind of the smallest area of things that we can look at. This is a little too small in EJScreen. We typically recommend using a block group to get the most accurate information for the area that you're in. And then the size of an area and population grow as we go up. And you can look at all of these in EJScreen, but we really try to focus on the block groups. But getting larger, we have the census tract, county, state, and then finally the United States. And as I mentioned, when we're looking at the tool, we can compare to just our own state, so Oregon, or we can compare to the entire United States. I typically recommend looking just compared to your state, so it gives you like a more relative basis of what you're working off of. And hopefully this all will kind of make a little more sense when I dive into the demo. I know it's a lot of information in an hour, but yeah, hopefully you'll be able to pick up little bits and pieces and then apply it later. So we have 12 environmental indicators in the tool. Each one you can see on the right side, it's telling you which year the data was updated. So not all data sets are updated every year, just based on the data that we have available. But some of them have been updated in 2022. So these indicators, some of them have to deal with health, air quality, traffic proximity. We have things like lead paint, and lead paint is one that's it's looking at houses that were built pre-1960. So it doesn't guarantee that there's lead paint present, but it's just an indicator that there may be. So there's information on all of these environmental indicators, like where the sources are coming from, what year they're updated. And I can kind of show you how to get to that web page from EJScreen from the tool. As I mentioned, we also have 7 socioeconomic indicators in the tool. And these are incorporated in when calculating those EJ indices and those supplemental indices. We include age on here, population under the age of 5 and over age 64, because sometimes those populations are more vulnerable to health impacts and environmental impacts than, you know, the in-between populations of those. So I kind of talked a little bit about the EJ index and how we calculate that. But again, we're looking at that environmental indicator compared to the demographic information of that block group. So this is just a calculation of how we're doing that. No one is expected to do mathematics. We're just showing you where the data is coming from and how we're looking at it. Again, the tool is doing this for you. You don't need to do that at all. So the health indicators that I mentioned, when we're in EJScreen, we can map all 3 of these. So we can look at low life expectancy, heart disease, or asthma. And this will kind of map those across any region that you're looking at to see, you know, where areas of low life expectancy might be persistent. I also mentioned that we have some climate change indicators. So these are really helpful. I know wildfire smoke and wildfire risk has impacted this area a lot in the recent years. So this is all updated data that we've added to EJScreen with this update. So these are other things that you can also kind of look at when you're comparing to those environmental indicators and things. And then finally, we have the critical service gap. So you can look at areas that may be food deserts or medically underserved areas, or areas that don't really have access to the internet. So this is really helpful for EPA when we're doing things like outreach. If we know an area might not have access to the internet, we'll have to find other ways of communicating with them. So this is something that I really want to stress. The results in EJScreen are presented to you as percentiles. So this is the only math that you kind of need to understand with the tool. So what percentiles are doing is they're kind of putting everything into common units so that you can compare it to other things. So like I said, we can compare to the state of Oregon or the nation. So if something ranks at the 80th percentile, that means that 20% of the US has a higher value. So typically when EPA uses EJScreen, if something is at that 80th percentile or above, that sets off like a red flag for us. And we're like, oh, there may be EJ concerns there. So typically that's kind of our threshold. There's nothing in writing that says that. So if something's at 79 or 75, doesn't mean I'm not going to look into it. It's just good to be aware of. The other thing I want to say about percentiles is sometimes when you pull up EJScreen, you might see that everything's bright red, everything's in the 95th percentile. And when we look at percentiles, it's all about the comparison. So just because you're in the 95th percentile, somebody always has to be the top and the bottom. So it doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, the air quality is super hazardous or super dangerous. It just means that in comparison to what you're comparing to, it's the highest. So I just like to mention that so that you don't get scared if you look at the map and see some bright red colors coming up at you. And then I mentioned I was going to talk about who uses EJScreen. So EPA has been looking at this over the years, and this is just kind of a breakdown of all the different users that we get. I know last night we had a lot of questions about university students, so hopefully in the future that could be something that's featured in this graph, and we can kind of engage more with universities, because I think that they would have a lot of fun playing with this tool. But on the left are some examples of how people use EJScreen. So they do EJ analysis with these. They do community outreach, environmental analysis. You can use this tool for education and teaching, some research. I've seen some really cool projects use EJScreen before. So this is just to give you a big picture of who's using it and for what. I also just wanted to add that there are a lot of EJScreen resources out there, me being one of them. But EJScreen has a website with a lot of technical information, a lot of like frequently asked questions, all kinds of things. And then the National EPA office also does regular office hours on EJScreen. So if you're ever using the tool and you have a question, you can just pop into those office hours and ask them real quick. And as I mentioned, this tool is new, so they're still doing public trainings on the tool. So the next one is November 16th. So if you feel like you want more information, you can totally attend that. And then you can also email me if you have any specific EJScreen questions. Here's my email. I think Laura will put it in the chat so everybody has that. And now I'm going to get to the fun part. We're going to do the live demonstration now. So it's up to everybody if they want to follow along. They want to do it themselves. It's totally up to you guys. So how do you find EJScreen? All you're going to do is type in EJScreen EPA into Google. And that first link that pops up should be this one. So as you can see, this is EPA's website. So it has a lot of the information I talked about on here. It goes over what is EJScreen, how to use it, understanding results. It's going to have a lot of where that data is coming from in there. There's also technical information if you really want to get into the numbers of how things are calculated. You can totally go off the deep end on this website. I've spent a lot of time on here. But right at the top of the website, you'll see this launch the EJScreen tool. So you're just going to click on that. And it's going to pull up the tool. So you can see it kind of loads where I am. Sometimes it does that, sometimes it doesn't. It seems to be a little inconsistent. But on the right side here, we can type in an address. So tonight, I think I'll start with Cathedral Park. And you can see it's going to put this little pink X on the map. So on the left side, when you open EJScreen, you have 4 different tabs up here. You have the Maps tab, the Places tab, the Reports tab, and the Tools tab. So I'm kind of walk through all of these tabs and the different ways you can use it. If anybody has questions as I'm doing this, please feel free to stop me. Same in the room if you guys have questions. So yeah, the first thing that we can do on this Maps tab is we can look at environmental justice indices, and we can pick one that we're interested in mapping. And up here, you'll see there's the compare to the US and compare to the state. So as I mentioned, I like to compare to the state just so you get the more relative localized data. And I'm going to look at Superfund proximity. Oh, it popped for a second. I don't know what just happened. Okay, we'll look at lead paint. So as you can see, everything in the map comes up as a different color. So on the right side, it's telling you the percentiles of what those color means. And you can click on specific areas to kind of get a little bit more information on, what percentile for each index it's falling into. So like for the low income percentile here, it's in the 30th. People of color, it's in the 91st percentile. And then lead paint, it's in the 70th percentile. So this EJ index is looking at all of those different percentiles to combine together to give you this one number of 83. That's the calculations I mentioned that you guys don't need to do. So you can map all of these different EJ index separately. And then the other thing that's really helpful is you can look at the pollution source by itself. So when we look at the map right now, this is again, including that demographic information. So now if I go to pollution and sources by itself, I'll click on lead paint, and you can kind of see how the map changes based on just the environmental indicator. So again, this is removing any demographic information and just telling you about lead paint in those areas. Yes, we have a question to do Superfund, so let's try that again. So Superfund proximity, this is looking at how many Superfund sites are within like a certain kilometer radius of where you are. So as you all know, the Superfund sites are along the river here. So it's interesting that those are not, bright red, they're not in the 95th percentile. But again, that's because this map is looking at the demographic information as well. When you're looking at the EJ indices, you're looking at the demographic with the environmental. So let's see how it changes when I click on just the pollution sources for Superfund. As you can see, then the whole Superfund site itself is the 95th to 100th percentile. So I just really want to stress that, because I think sometimes looking at the tool can be kind of confusing. Like when I click on one thing, why is it this and why is it that? So just remember that the EJ index includes that demographic information. I know I've stressed that a lot, but it's just important to know when you're interpreting the tool. So as I mentioned, there's also health disparities. So we can look at low life expectancy for areas, and the health disparities, the climate change data, and the critical service gaps only have the option to compare to the nation. They don't have the option to compare to the state. So on the right side here, you'll see low life expectancy. And let's say you want to know more information, like where is EJScreen getting this information? You can click on that I next to low life expectancy. You click on that I for information, and it's going to take you to this page, this website that has all kinds of information on where the data is coming from. So if you ever have questions or are unsure of like where we're getting our sources, it's embedded into the tool. That way you're able to just pull it right up. So that's like a broad overview of this Maps tab. The second tab we're going to go to is Places. So let's say you're interested in where are all the schools, because children, can feel impacts differently than adults. So we can click on schools, and you'll see that all these little flags will pop up over the map. You can also click on churches, hospitals. So there's a lot of different things that you can look at on the Places tab if you're just curious about specific entities. Then we have, moving to the right, we have the Reports tab. To me, this is the most powerful part of the tool. If you want to use EJScreen really quickly, this is what I highly recommend going to. So we have different options. We can drop a pin, we can select a block group, we can draw an area. So to get started, I'm going to drop a pin here at Cathedral Park. Or did we say maybe we'll do Roosevelt High School? I think let's try Roosevelt. So I'm going to drop a pin right on Roosevelt High, and then I am going to and I'm going to add a 1 mile buffer to the map, just so we can kind of see the area impacted around the school. And then I think the most powerful button in this entire tool is get that printable standard report. And this is going to open a separate tab. And you can see right at the top, you can save as a PDF. So this is what you can download. And at the top of this report, it's going to tell you the approximate population in that area that you selected, how big the area is. And then this first table is all about those EJ indices. So it's giving you the percentile compared to the state and compared to the nation. So instantly when I'm looking at this, I see quite a few things that are above that 80th percentile. And you can see that they also do a graph of that. So then scrolling down, usually there's a map. It looks like today the map did not load, but typically there'll be a map on this report so that you know exactly that bubble that you had captured. And then this second table at the bottom here is just looking at the environmental indicator without the demographic information. So it's giving you the percentiles in this third column. And then it's giving you the value of that particular environmental indicator compared to the state average. So you can see like for ozone, the state average is 37 parts per billion, but the value here is 34.3. So you can see it's in the 25th percentile because it's below that state average. So this is where you can kind of get really technical information. And as I mentioned, on that EPA EJScreen website, if you want to get into the technical documentation, that's totally available to you. I'm not going to dive into that tonight. But yeah, I just wanted to make you aware that, so this second table at the bottom is separating those environmental indicators, those demographic indicators, and then the top is giving you them combined. So this was a report that we pulled up when we did that 1 mile buffer around the area. But let's say we wanted to select a block group, because at like where the school is, because as I mentioned, block groups are kind of that small scale data that EJScreen is pulling from. So I think that they're really powerful to look at as well. So we'll get the printable standard report for the block group. So you can see in this block group that the population is way smaller than this 1 mile buffer. We have 20,000 compared to 1,000. And the input area is also much smaller. So we're getting more information about this much smaller area. And as you can see, there are still quite a few things above that 80th percentile. Same thing, we'll have the graphs. These reports look pretty similar, but I just think it's helpful to look at the block group level. And then same thing, you can come down to the bottom and look at those environmental indicators. The other thing that's really powerful when you select an area like this is to get this 2016 to 2020 ACS report. So again, that's going to open another tab that you can save and download. What? American Census Survey, right? American Community Survey, sorry. ACS is American Community Survey. So it's going to pull up a report of that area, again, that you selected. And it's going to give you specific information of the population living in that area. So you can see, how many households are there. You can see the population by race. You can see the percentage of males and females, the ages of the population, the languages spoken. So again, this is really helpful when conducting outreach to know, who the community is in the areas that you're working. So again, I encourage you guys to look at this and kind of save these reports. So yeah, so those are a few of the features on this reports tab. The final tab is the tools tab. And here's where you can do things like save a session. So if I wanted to add this area, I can save it for later and download it back onto my map. I can use this measure tool to see how far apart like if I wanted to see how far apart these schools are, that's something I could do with the measure. You can also do side-by-side comparisons if you're interested in seeing a map that, maps Superfund EJ indices compared to Superfund environmental indicators. You can add your own shapefiles in EJScreen if that's something that you have. You can also search the geo platform. So if ESRI has any other maps that you're aware of, you can overlay them on EJScreen if that's something you're interested in. You can also print your session, which is essentially taking a screenshot of the screen. And then you can play with the boundaries as well. So this tools tab has just a few ways to continue to expand what you can do with EJScreen. So yeah, each tab kind of has something different to look at and play around with. Did anybody have any questions? I know I went through that really quick because I wanted to give you guys time to play with it and ask questions.